Hi, I'm Bruce Bolger. I'm founder of the Enterprise Engagement Alliance, and we're here today to talk about innovation and collaboration with three people with decades of experience in this area. And I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. Stephen, please start with you.
Sure. I have spent basically 25 years of my life focused on innovation. The first part of that was when I was with Accenture. And one of the things that I did with the help of a number of other people was we created this 20,000 person practice around innovation and process and how do we make sure we're helping companies grow. And that's been my passion for the past 25 years. And for 20 years, I've been doing this on my own. So it's been a great journey. And I'm a big believer in innovation because I think it's something we need right now, probably more than ever.
I agree. Arthur.
So I spent 28 years in the corporate world, focused on insights and innovation. I created the very first innovation team and the very first innovation pipeline in the Pfizer Consumer Healthcare division that I spent most of my time at. It became so successful that it inspired the entire innovation program for the Pfizer Consumer Healthcare division. And eventually I was promoted to become the global director of consumer insights and new product identification, responsible for all the global market research programs and also the creation and mentorship of the new product teams for the division. After I left the company, I thought about how I can best leverage my passion for innovation and decided to create the Innovation Global Network, which is an online platform for all professionals who are focused on all the different aspects of innovation. It's a place where professionals can come and find best practices and companies that have best practices and for a place for those who have best practices to talk about them and build their reputation and organically connect with those who need those best practices.
Thank you. Ira.
Thanks, Bruce. I'm Ira Ozer, president of Innovation Meetings and Engagement Partners. We are a company that helps consult with companies about how to best motivate and engage people anywhere across the enterprise. So employees, salespeople, channel partners, customers, even broadly the community. And that's really ties into stakeholder capitalism. We believe enterprise engagement by connecting those different communities is the path towards stakeholder capitalism. Innovation is, in my view and in my practice, the most important lever of engagement that there is. By allowing people to become more innovative, and we'll talk about all kinds of ways to do that, it really opens up a host of benefits to the company. So engagement partners is our broad engagement practice. Innovation Meetings is our specialty division that helps companies take people offsite to get them to understand what innovation is all about, the types of innovation there are, the personality style they have to be innovative, getting them to be useful of innovation technology, getting them offsite to identify problems and challenges, and coming back and having a lot of fun during the process. So I look forward to this conversation. Thank you very much, Bruce.
Well, thank you.
Arthur and Stephen.
We always like to give a few thanks to the companies that help support all of our educational opportunities, or I should say activities. Now going to stop the share and get right into it. Stephen, how would you define a solid innovation strategy?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's important to recognize that innovation isn't about novelty. So I think we need to get into a definition of innovation before we talk about innovation strategy. To me, innovation is really about relevance and adaptability. And so relevance means that it doesn't mean that we have to be unique. It doesn't have to mean that we're different. It doesn't mean that we have to be novel or new. But in fact, what it means is that we need to be valuable in the eyes of the market, whether it's our clients, our customers, our partners. And so a good innovation strategy is really a relevance strategy. What are we going to do to stay relevant? What are we going to do to create as much value in the marketplace as we possibly can? So it is a very outside-in approach rather than the traditional inside-out approach that we typically tend to use.
Arthur, the audience for innovation, people often think of it as an employee activity, defined as Stephen does, and if you disagree with his definition, chime in. But assuming you don't, does innovation stop with employees, or has it really become part of the culture when it's done effectively?
well, there has to be a culture in order for it to, to be done effectively. There also needs to be a strategy. The strategy and the culture are two different things, but they are very much interlinked and intertwined with each other. The issue within companies is that people can row their boats in different directions. And when that happens, you get anarchy and you get waste, you get inefficiency, you get people arguing with each other, and nothing gets done. And you've seen that in time and time in organizations where everyone's like rowing their boats in different directions, and the company doesn't get anywhere. The innovation strategy is a document that identifies the focus areas for the company in terms of innovation and establishes the priorities for innovation. It's a document that aligns the employees and the management and the stakeholders together. They all contribute to the strategy. They approve the strategy. They align to the strategy, and that gets everyone rowing the oars in the best directions. That's in the best interest of the growth and the success of the organization or the brand, depending on who's creating the innovation strategy.
So what I'm hearing in common from both of you is that it's an organic process that affects all stakeholders. It's not cut off. It's not in a box. It's not segregated from the organization. So Ira, why is it, I've been following the innovation field since the early 1990s, and I'm going to ask the other gentlemen whether they agree. I don't think it's a mature industry at all. I think it's actually early stage, that in terms of companies implementing it the way these two gentlemen have, I think, laid out is rare. Do you think I'm right on that? And if I am, why?
There are many companies, especially big enterprises, that have very sophisticated and well thought out innovation strategies and programs and systems. Not sure they're all effective in terms of bringing forth relevancy to the market, as Stephen talked about, and execution on the strategies Arthur talked about. But there's a world of growth opportunity, especially in the SMB market and in large enterprises. So many times chief innovation officers, when they exist, are treated as viruses and booted out because it's not invented here in my division or my department. There are a lot of complexities that these fellows can talk to very effectively about. I would say, though, that from the engagement industry standpoint, 20 years ago, suggestion boxes and suggestion programs were a very popular type of incentive program. And they would usually be based on, give us suggestions for new products and things that can improve processes around here and cut costs. A lot of cost-cutting initiatives were the focus, and we'll give you awards and recognition. And companies would spend millions of dollars on these awards and have tons of unimplemented and in many cases unimplementable ideas. So the shift from the suggestion box to the innovation system is a big one, and most companies have not really done it effectively. Most companies don't even have a suggestion box to begin with. I can't think of a big company or any kind of company as a consumer that I've gone to, and it's an easy way to propose something. Hey, I had an issue. Give me, feedback is very, very rarely asked, and when it is, and I'm going to shut up in a second, it's from the perspective of that company. What did you think about our restaurant? We have these 10 questions. I have an 11th question. I want to propose something to you, and I have no way of doing it. Anyway, a lot of growth.
Well, no, thank you. All good points. Stephen, you're obviously, as a world recognized speaker on this, you get to meet with a lot of the people probably that are doing it right, because that's why they're engaged. But what's your honest assessment in terms of the broad implementation of effective innovation culture in businesses, generally speaking?
I think it varies widely, as you would expect. There are some people who do it exceptionally well, and it is ingrained in the culture, in the way they do things. And then there are others who are in the beginning stages. And, and admittedly, the people who would call me in are the people who might be sort of in the middle stage. They're not just starting out, but they've been implementing some innovation strategies. So like Ira was talking about, I think what's happened is most companies have equated innovation with ideas. And I think it's happening in many places, but it's I think really where we're starting to see some of the biggest shifts is in this belief that the idea is not the answer. I mean, the suggestion box, the hackathon, the idea management, that's not where the real value lies. It's important, but it's only a small part of the equation. To me, the key is asking better questions, the challenge. And this is really where a lot of companies are starting to go. They're starting to wake up to it. It's where most of my work focuses on. So again, admittedly, I have a bias in terms of the companies I work with, because the companies I work with are the companies that want to implement my philosophy, which is the problem, the issue, the opportunity is really the center of the universe, not the idea, the thought, the opinion, or suggestion. And so I see a lot of interest right now, but I know that probably the biggest challenge has been, and it's why I wanted to start off with a definition of innovation, is because if you ask 100 people to define innovation, you're going to get 101 different answers. And that to me is the biggest problem, is when a leader of an organization tells its people, go innovate, and then they don't give them any boundaries or guidelines or tools or methods or processes, well, then people are just confused and it just creates sort of chaos. So where I think most companies are recognizing is we need to move away from this episodic, idea-driven innovation to one that is actually a systematized process where everybody understands their role in innovation, their unique role in innovation. And I see that happening. I really do believe that there's a lot of interest in this right now, especially given the pandemic, where people have more problems and more opportunities than ever. When you start thinking about things through the lens of problems and opportunities rather than innovation, I think people really start to gravitate towards it a lot more powerfully.
Arthur, it seems to me what Stephen is saying is the essence of our whole concept of enterprise engagement. It has to be strategic, systematic, led by the CEO, and measurable and manageable. From your standpoint, what are the essential elements that the CEO, CFO better have in their mind before they decide to really embark on a strategic approach to innovation?
Well, first of all, I completely agree with Stephen about the idea of challenges. It starts with the challenge, and that's the purpose of the innovation strategy. It defines the focus areas for innovation, which in turn defines the challenges that the organization is being asked to take on in terms of innovation. The CEO has to be the champion of this. He has to embrace this innovation strategy, and he has to require his leadership to take on these challenges and to work with each other, that they are responsible and accountable for working independently and each other to take on these challenges. Once you have that buy-in from the CEO and from the leadership team, and if the strategy is developed with, as you say, crowdsourced across the organization, that is all those that are required to deliver the innovation have input, and they understand the strategy that comes out of it, and they are aligned to it, then the organization will work together to create that pipeline of innovations. When you get ideas, people know what ideas you're looking for. They understand the challenges. They're more likely to forward a relevant idea if they understand what the challenge is all about.
And you know what? I mean, Stephen, since you brought that up, I'm going to ask you to flesh that out, and then I'm going to get back to you, Ira, on the human element of this. So, Stephen, go in a little bit more depth on this whole challenge concept. What do you two mean by this exactly? I think you say it's important. I want to make sure we understand it.
Sure. So I think what happens, if you think about the evolution of innovation, I think it started off with ideas, which is basically the suggestion box or the hackathon. The next step is, focusing on challenges, which means, okay, well, what's the real problem we're solving? What's the opportunity we're focused on? And then the evolution beyond that, which is where you really get to the innovation strategy, is figuring out which are the right problems, what are the right opportunities. And so you start focusing on differentiation. You start focusing on what's going to help you stand out, what's going to give you the greatest returns on your investment. And that to me is really what it's all about. So if you look at, right now in IT, for example, one of their biggest challenges might be hiring people, because the war for talent is growing faster than ever, and the talent pool is smaller than the demand for IT. Okay, well, if that's a critical skill for an organization to have. If being able to solve that problem is important, let's spend our time solving that rather than talking about how do we speed up a process that might have a very small incremental impact on the organization. So we need to start thinking about everything we do as an organization, as a portfolio, and we use different strategies. Innovation is not the strategy for every single opportunity we have. We could focus, we could do outsourcing and partnerships and best practices and Six Sigma as a strategy for being able to solve a good portion of our problems. And the key is to recognize which are the ones where we're gonna have the biggest impact, our differentiating opportunities. Those are the ones where we apply innovation. And we can use a broad range of techniques. I know crowdsourcing was mentioned, but that's just one of many different techniques for being able to solve these problems. And I would also argue that, you know, it's nice when the CEO, when she's the sponsor of innovation, but in most cases, that's not necessarily where it starts. It usually starts with someone at some type of leadership level who's passionate about this. And so what we're able to do, I'm doing this with one company right now, where we're starting not at the top, but we're sort of in the middle part of the organization, but we're seeing a lot of momentum. And as that starts to evolve, others see the value in it, and we can now start make a bigger impact. It's ideal if you can get the CEO, CFO, COO to be bought in, but that's a very difficult thing to do. And it doesn't mean it should stop us from focusing on this. And I'll just say one last thing is, I think it was Ira who said, you know, using the word innovation and the antibodies, somebody said something to that effect. And I absolutely believe it to be true, which is why in most companies where we go, you know, I try to, if we're talking to executives, we don't even use the word innovation in many cases because they don't feel like they have time for innovation. It's for special people who have special skills. But when we call it problem solving, even though it might feel like it's demeaning innovation and lowering its value, it actually makes it more acceptable to most people. Every person in an organization should be a master problem formulator. They should be finding problems and formulating problems, not worrying about the solutions. We've always said, don't bring me problems, bring me solutions. And I think that's terrible advice. I don't want more solutions. I want better, more important, more differentiating problems. Bigger questions, they're gonna have a bigger impact.
No, that's just great. This is just refreshing. You know, Ira, looking back over that, I've attended many conferences over the years, in innovation conferences from some of these, you know, the well-known conference companies. And one of the things I've always noticed is a lot of the people at those conferences are engineer type people. And that there seems to be, in many cases, overlooking the people issue. Now, listening to Stephen, every single solution related to problem solving is a people issue. It's a human being looking at something, and they need to be engaged. They need to know what, to Stephen's and Arthur's point, what is the challenge? What's the framework at which they should be looking at a problem? Has the innovation industry or the problem solving industry culturally overlooked the people issue in many cases? And Arthur and Stephen, I'm going to let you answer that too, but that's your area of expertise, Ira, so I'm starting with you.
Yeah, I would say that there are two big benefits of innovation. Number one, you can have ideas that are transformative for the company completely. You could have ideas that help just improve new product development or solve a problem of hiring, as Stephen mentioned as an example, or other specific problems to challenges a company's having. But aside from that, from a cultural perspective, letting people know at every level in the organization that they are the expert, that we respect their opinion, that they are on the front line with customers and with each other, and giving them some tools to train them to do the problem solving is just so beneficial for engagement, you know, because who says to a production worker or a fast food frontline restaurant worker, you're the expert, you know, what can we do to improve? And small improvements can be made by everyone without it becoming a major innovation initiative. But so just speaking from engagement, it's a wonderful engagement lever that should be practiced by every organization. And I'll close with one thing. Stephen Shapiro wrote a great book. We just reviewed it recently in Engagement Strategies, Invisible Solutions. And I'm not going to talk to the book, but it's a very great read. And he's identified 25 filters that should be viewed to identify a problem, to really pose a better problem, to understand what problem you want to actually solve. Because so many companies end up starting these initiatives and solving a problem that wasn't a problem to begin with, or it wasn't defined, or so on. So everybody should receive innovation training, in my opinion.
And so, Stephen, Arthur, gosh, what a day I'm having. Arthur, this whole idea of the challenge, and again, that Stephen, I'm going to circle back to you on as well. Are you two gentlemen basically saying that, no, don't just have a suggestion box? No, you really have to frame, you have to orient people. And you can't just do that by giving a speech or having the CEO doing a quick Zoom meeting. I would imagine this is a drip type of process, as Seth Godin, the marketing guru, likes to call it. So getting to Arthur, are you saying then that we really need more direction in a problem solving or innovation strategy, rather than just saying, here, give us any ideas?
No, absolutely. First is setting up the focus, and then it's framing the challenge. And how you frame the challenge is critically important to what people will come up with in terms of ideas. You can define a challenge very narrowly, which almost suggests the ideas that you're looking for. And so you're going to get a very narrow set of ideas. Or you can set the challenge more broadly, but relevantly, in a way that opens up the thinking, the creativity of people, that gets them thinking of different kinds of solutions that will meet the needs of the organization, that inspire and creates enthusiasm and passion, and gets people's blood racing and wanting to bring their ideas up in front of people. And this is where the really big creative ideas come from. And if you do that, you will also find that people will build on those ideas and make those ideas bigger and better. So the how you frame the challenge is very important. But of course, then the challenge also has to be communicated out to people, and they have to know that their input and their ideas are being sought and they're welcomed, and that they will be treated with respect and they will be considered. And they have to know what happens with those ideas, and why they're if they're not pursued, why they're not pursued. That's respect. They view that with respect, and the feedback helps them develop better ideas and come forward with better ideas in the future. And that's how you create an innovation culture within an organization. When I created my first innovation team, I told the members of the team that this wouldn't be a team of a leader and followers. I said this was going to be a team of leaders, that every one of the team is a leader in their own functional areas, and therefore they're all responsible for initiative and for contributing and providing input and bringing up issues. And everything that they bring up will be discussed with respect, and they will understand the solutions and the paths that are taken forward. And by doing that, it empowered the people to and encourage them to really talk and bring up new ideas and be creative and build on each other's ideas. And the result was the very first successful functional innovation team within the organization that created the first successful new product pipeline in the organization.
Well, that's obviously why you're passionate about the business, the results. Stephen, I love this challenge concept. And I think it's a really important takeaway for everybody that, no, this is not about having a suggestion box up and just saying, hey, give us ideas. This is really about creating, is this really almost a marketing thing in a way? Marketing, obviously oriented toward the need of the organization, but that would create the challenge kind of, okay, everybody, let's say, for instance, we've got to reduce our cycle time on this particular process by XYZ. And if we do that, there'll be enormous benefits to our clients. So the challenge becomes, folks, doors open, come at us with ideas. Is it that kind of thing to keep people focused on something? Is that what you mean by a challenge granularly?
It is, and we seem to be in the conversation, though, always defaulting to crowds finding solutions. So it's not like we as an organization are going to define, we need to reduce cycle time. Okay, everybody, give us your solutions to that. Because then that implies that every time we want to do anything, we have to, it starts and it stops, and it's like limited by the number of problems that we're posing to the organization. So I think it's much more organic than that. If you can have every person inside the organization just recognize, okay, I've been doing it this way all the time. How could I reframe the problem? And maybe I implement it on my own. I don't have to get anybody else. Or maybe I partner with a small team. So it's not like every single time we have a problem, we have to go say, okay, 10,000 people, take a look at it, see what we're doing. That's not what I'm suggesting at all. We just need people to understand what matters. And I want to build on something that Arthur said, which I think is really, extremely important. I call it the Goldilocks principle, which basically says we tend to ask questions that are either too soft, which means they're too abstract. And therefore, if they're not specific, when we do ask a crowd, we're going to get hundreds or thousands of ideas, and that is not valuable. And if we ask them too specific, which is definitely something Arthur talked about, well, then they're basically solutions masquerading as questions. So we want them just right. And so what we need to understand is that getting that level of abstraction is critical for the way the brain operates. Because we always say, don't think outside the box, but the reality is you don't want to think outside the box. You want to find a better box. Because if we go too abstract, we then, if I say, how can we improve revenues? And even if I ask just an individual in a company, how can I improve revenues? I'm going to get 100 answers. If I ask 1,000 people, I'll get 100,000 different ideas. That's not innovation. That's wasting people's time asking them a problem that wasn't well framed. They didn't take the time to understand it. But
So
if we can start now.
So how do you frame that question then?
Well, part of it comes down to what is the real problem? Like, do we want revenues? Do we want customers? Do we want profits? Profits and revenues aren't the same thing. Well, if we want profits, maybe what we want to do is say, instead of getting more customers who are profitable, how do we target our most profitable customers and have fewer of those? Okay, well, that's a different question, but now we need to go get data. Who are our most profitable customers? Where do we have the greatest leverage point? And so what you do is if something's too abstract, we need to use a number of different perspectives to deconstruct it, find the leverage points, and figure out how can we make it a little bit narrower so we're really zeroing in on what the real problem is. In a lot of cases, like one example, which I like is working in education, government wanted us to solve the problem. How do we improve an education system? Well, think about the Goldilocks principle. Education system is about as abstract as you can get, because it's teachers pay, classroom size, infrastructure, technology. There's 1,001 different factors. So the first question as part of the reframe is, well, what does education make possible? Maybe we don't care about education, we care about a child's learning. Okay, great, that's a different question. Then the next question was, well, what's the leverage point in a child's learning? And the research says that, well, it's positive parental involvement. So you can see the evolution of what was a problem of education now went to, how do we get parents engaged in a child's learning? Fundamentally different question is going to yield fundamentally different answers, and it's going to eliminate the noise. Instead of getting tens of thousands of solutions, we might get 5. But we want to improve that signal to noise ratio, the ratio between what we want and what we don't want. And it's the good solutions that we want to focus on. It's not about quantity, it's about quality. So that to me is really the key, is if we take the time to do that reframing, we make our system significantly more efficient. And we also, there's so much more I could talk about this, but I think you get the idea of where I'm going with it.
Well, and I do, and which I think we are going toward the end of this program, but what it kind of convinces me even more, Stephen, of how this is not that mature of an industry yet. The level of your approach, which to me just sings, okay? And what you and Arthur are both talking about in Ira, I just don't see that much of it. You see more of it because you're being brought in. So here's what I'm going to end with. I'm going to give you guys each of the same kind of question. You're sitting on an airplane with a CEO who has, as you know, they have very big, no offense to you CEOs, a lot of you don't have much of an attention span. And you really want to have it said very quickly. And then if you're convinced, you'll listen more because you're very busy. So I'm going to ask you 2 questions, starting with you, Ira. First, where do you think, defined the way Stephen and Arthur do, the concept of innovation is as a cultural, as a business accepted, serious practice that I think is really essential? So are we on the maturity scale 1 to 10? Okay. Like total quality management and manufacturing, we'll all agree it's about a 7 or 8. They may not be doing it perfectly, but companies really made the shift to total quality management. I don't think they've done that in people, but maybe you think differently. So Ira, 1 to 10, and then what's that advice, the quick advice you give to that CEO, the essential things they better take away before they hire anybody in innovation?
Innovation is a 10, and they have to understand that their business and their industry, as they know it, may be crushed, may be completely transformed by a disruptive company, and they need to really innovate much faster and be aware of not just continuous improvement, that's very, very important, but really know where the next thing might be and reframe problems. You know, if it's a taxi industry, maybe it's not improving the taxi industry, maybe it's getting to the root solution, which is how do we move people more effectively? Maybe we wouldn't even think of taxis at all. You know, we think of something like Uber or a different person-to-person rideshare. So many industries have gotten, you know, overstepped and taken down. Retail by Amazon, there are hundreds of examples. And that happens in every industry. So CEOs really need to treat this as a 10.
Well, but okay, that's not what my question was, though. How many CEOs treat it as a 10? How about that?
Oh.
Broad.
I'd say 30%, not even.
You're being generous. Arthur, same thing. Where do you view your industry in terms of maturity, and what's your advice to that CEO before you open up the wine in first class?
If you ask most organizations, you know, you ask the CEOs of most organizations, almost all of them would say that innovation is important to them, you know, and that their organizations are, you know, they would like to believe are capable of innovation. But the reality tends to be a bit different than that. And they don't have innovation cultures, and they don't tend to have good, solid innovation strategies. And to the extent that they have those, they're not stable within the organizations, they're not sustainable within the organizations, and so they don't get very far very quickly. But I will say is that I think there's a growing awareness in organizations that they need to be innovative, and the reason is that technology is accelerating, and that brings both challenges to the organization as well as opportunities. Also, competition is coming from all over the globe now. And no category is safe anymore. No industry is safe, and organizations are feeling less and less safe about their brands and products. And they're beginning to realize that they have to innovate. Not all of them have done what they need to do in order to successfully innovate, but there's a growing awareness that if they don't, there's going to be trouble. And the more uncomfortable they are, the more likely they're going to go actually do what they need to do to be innovative.
Well, the advice I'm getting so far is that you almost have to do this, CEO, because if you don't, you could be eaten. You can be eaten up. Stephen, where do you think it is on the maturity level? And 1 to 10, and what's your advice to that CEO who's being pitched an innovation strategy?
I think I'm more optimistic, and partly if we step back and ask the question, what is the purpose of innovation? The purpose of innovation isn't to have a culture. It's not to have processes. It's not to have enabling technologies. The purpose of innovation is to keep the company relevant. And the reality is, if you look at most companies, they've done a reasonable job of staying relevant. And so I'm more optimistic that as an outcome, innovation is there. Now, how companies do it's going to be different. How an Apple is going to innovate is going to be different than how a smaller business with fewer resources might innovate. It will be different for a company that's in the hospitality industry. So I think we sometimes get caught up in looking at and diagnosing how well a company is doing with innovation by looking at its bits and pieces, its parts, its training, its processes, and things of that nature. I think most companies are doing an okay job. Does it mean that they couldn't raise their game? Absolutely they could. Does it mean it's going to become more important as the speed of change outside increases? Of course, they're going to have new tools, new techniques, new approaches. But I would say, I'd say probably a 5 or 6. I think where a lot of times it's challenging is when the old approaches to innovation stop working, then they struggle with trying to implement the new approaches. And so my advice to a CEO or a leader of an organization is, how can we continue to do what you've been doing with innovation, but make it more efficient, make it more repeatable, and make it something that becomes much more organic. And I think, the biggest issue I've had with innovation is it tends to be very episodic. And so it starts and it stops, and it happens when someone's inspired. And I think when you start looking at it from a leadership perspective, and I'll just close with one company. It's a controversial company, but I love this, their mindset. It's Koch Industries out of Wichita, Kansas, KOCH. And they are in paper, pulp, petrochemicals, carpets, Dixie paper cups, Brawny paper towels. And their whole philosophy is something called experimental discovery, and that's part of their market-based management approach. And what I love is that their whole belief is that the leaders of the organization don't have the answers, but what they can do is provide the resources to anyone and everyone in the organization to help them tap into their creative, collective abilities. And so I think that's what we need to do, is just start tapping into everyone. So my advice to a CEO would be, stop trying to have the answers. Tell your leaders they don't have the answers. The whole point of everything that we're talking about here is to ask better questions that gets everyone inside of an organization to ask better questions. And now you've got this organic process that will adapt, evolve, and change to keep an organization relevant.
Well, that was terrific. In fact, you saved me some work because that was such a good recap. I don't need to spend as much time on mine. So first off, any listener to this program knows why we invited these 3 experts. This is just first-rate information, and a very quick summary is that, again, the more strategic and systematic and proactive an innovation strategy is, the better. You need to have it. It doesn't necessarily need to have the CEO behind it, but it needs to be champions. Biggest risks, having them be episodic. So it's important to build the whole process into your culture, but it's going way beyond the suggestion box. It's really about getting people focused on the types of ideas that are going to help the organization, so that you don't, it's not, as one gentleman said, it's not just quantity, it's quality. And it really has to be enduring. And I think the biggest message here is that this is moving from a nice to have to a need to have. The level of disruption, who would have ever thought that taxi cabs would be completely almost destroyed? We've seen industries destroyed in 10 years like we've never seen before. So Stephen Shapiro, thank you very much. Arthur Fox, Ira Ozer, great session. We look forward to working with you again. And viewers, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Bruce.
Thank you.
Steve, Arthur.